It's funny. Just past couple of days, my daughter said, "Wait, non-Jewish people celebrate Thanksgiving?"
This is our first of 2 Thanksgiving episodes of Jews Talk Racial Justice.
This is Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracie,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin and Tracie Decker.
In a complex world, change takes courage.
Wholehearted relationships can keep us accountable. So, April, when this episode that we're recording right now airs, it will be Thanksgiving Day.
It will be Thanksgiving Day.
Which is a holiday that is very complicated, actually. Much more complicated, I think, than we were taught to believe when we were, doing Thanksgiving Day pageants as elementary school kids.
And it's complicated on multiple levels. It's complicated in both its history and implications, there are complicated dynamics for folks around a family who aren't often together, coming together and needing to reconcile different perspectives.
Yeah.
And the food is delicious.
It's true. It's true.
That's one part of it that is not as complicated. And even for meat eaters or vegan, like just the themes, like the different fall foods, like I have, as we'll get into in a future episode, like I have many complicated feelings about the holiday, but the food is delicious.
It's true. I'm a big fan of pumpkin pie, just in general. I really like pumpkin pie. So
yeah, I like it all, to be honest.
Yeah.
What is it called? The cranberry sauce.
Yeah.
On everything,
Yep.
With, oh my goodness.
As like almost like a condiment. Yeah. And it's funny how people how nostalgia plays into that too. Like which food, like whether or not you're one of the jellied ones who likes it out of the can or like the one that, you actually make. So it, has the fruit in it.
Yes.
I grew up on that can and I still kind of like that slice of cranberry sauce.
I have both elements in my family.
Yeah. No,
I got the canned family and the fresh with orange rind, shreds.
Orange rind one. Yeah, it's delicious. It's delicious. Yeah, and as you named, it's an opportunity for family who don't always get together, though this year that also is complicated because of a little thing called a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So
and like even more, right? Like and I know percentage wise, demographically, it hasn't affected the Jewish community as much directly. That's not so true for our Black community and communities of color, but specifically the Black community. And there's also, which we didn't talk in prepping for this, the fact that for some families, including mine, some of our elders or young folks aren't here anymore.
Aren't with us anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
Both for other reasons and explicitly because of this enormous thing, right? Of a global pandemic, right? So there's just a lot happening. And I think there are all kinds of situations within which folks will be listening, or will be entering this. One of the folks I have in mind that I'm specifically holding up are, and to be clear, I am not exactly going to be so much this person, which is maybe why I have even more empathy for this person. The person who is, in spite of all of these things, is working to make this day special for people they love, or maybe even people they don't know who are in their community. I know Tamar Manasseh out in Chicago, who runs Mask. I see she's been doing this huge effort with her partners, with other community leaders to make sure families have, while I have personally my own very strong feelings and perceptions, I also want to hold the in my heart the people who specifically the people who also may have that and are still like for any number of reasons. I think I loved what I'd love to hear your thoughts, some of your thoughts about the Jewish community's ties to this holiday and the reasons why this holiday is important, right? And I do want to speak to folks who do have this day off, and however they may feel about the complexity of the holiday, also are taking it upon themselves to make this day special for people and putting in work. So I'd love to do an episode that can both speak to everyone and is thoughtful about people who, in spite of everything, are still reaching for connection and love on this day. And so and I'll save my strident comments for our next episode. The one thing I think I'll say before we dive in with this specific episode, more focused on being or not being together with family, and how do we confront and navigate differences of perspective with people. Yes. So I'm hoping this can be more of a supportive, maybe feel good or comforting episode, and we can save the hard hitting episode for next time. This holiday specifically is one of the trickiest things for me as a social justice and anti-oppression and liberation leader. Like most things, I feel like I can navigate the both and really seamlessly. And this one is tougher for reasons we'll get into in the next episode, but it's not, there's a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance and a lot of important variables.
Yeah. It's definitely complicated on so many layers. I mean, anytime, frankly, in my opinion, anytime you get a lot of extended family together, it gets complicated.
Oh, that,
it's just sort of the nature of extended family.
Yeah.
And then there are added layers for this holiday in particular.
And so this show is called Jews Talk Racial Justice. So I'd love to hear from you, Tracie, some of your perspective about what is, if anything, particularly Jewish or relevant within Jewish identity, American Jewish identity and culture, like where Thanksgiving sits or has sat in the context of collective identity, noting that there's actually a diversity. But if we're specifically, say, looking at the Ashkenazi Jewish American experience.
Yeah, thank you for that invitation. I have this strong sense that Thanksgiving was one of the ways that my Ashkenazi ancestors, and I suspect many, signaled their Americanness. So it's been a, talk about a both and for American Jewish immigrants to America who are Jewish, like trying to hold both American and Jewish at the same time in a country that, though technically is not a Christian country, culturally really is. And so finding the space for both of those things. And I think Thanksgiving was an opportunity for these immigrants to really signal their complete embrace of their new country, or, even first and second generation folks who, whose parents maybe were the immigrants or grandparents were the immigrants. It's still like this way of signaling, no, I am 100% American and also 100% Jewish, because, here I am at my Thanksgiving table. And it was a really, really big deal. I have echoes every time I think about Jews and Thanksgiving. I have echoes of Barry Levinson's movie Avalon, where the famous scene where they cut the turkey without the one uncle whose name I totally don't remember. I'm sure our fans can remind me of his name. But I hear his sort of Yiddish accent, like, you cut the turkey without me.
Oh my gosh. Tracie, this must be where my dad got it from. Every year he's talked about cutting the turkey. Like it's this whole, you can't cut that. And I think I've never actually seen that
Oh, you gotta
movie.
watch
And
the
often they'll
movie.
say, oh, he's about to cut the Twinkie. We're all here to see him cut the Twinkie. Like every year. And my dad has these different things that like he's clearly at times referencing something, but
But you
I
don't know
don't
what
know
he's
what it is.
referencing.
And yeah, like we were driving. He never played the song when we were little, but he would just like be driving and be like, I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. And it wasn't until I heard like Snoop, I was like, that's for that. like,
That's
like,
funny. Barry
but
Levinson and Snoop Dogg all together,
you
Nathan's
know,
dad.
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
New Jersey black man who grew up around a lot of Jews and has Jewish extended family, you know. So
Yeah,
it's all
yeah,
in the
makes
mix.
sense. So Levinson is particularly for me as a Baltimore American Jew, like Barry Levinson is another Baltimorean, and Avalon is about, I mean, it's about a family, but it takes place in Baltimore, and Baltimore is almost a character in
Do you remember
in all
when
of his
this
movies,
movie
but
came out?
it's
I'm
from
like
the
curious.
80s. It's
80,
not new.
okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't have the
But I
exact
wasn't sure if
year,
it was
but
like a 70s thing or
no,
it was
I think it
even
was a mid 80s movie, I believe. So yeah, and so the movie tells the story of sort of three generations. It starts with the immigrant coming to Baltimore and seeing all the lights, and then goes through the family which is sort of it tells the story that has become held up as the American story of sort of the immigrant coming like maybe during or just before the war, and then the increasing alienation and sort of separation of the family over the generations. It's a great movie, and that there's a pivotal scene where there's a falling out between two brothers because Thanksgiving at the one brother's house, they cut the turkey without the other brother. And so it becomes a falling out between the two brothers because they cut the turkey without him. And he says it in the way your dad said it every year. So, yeah. So anyway, I think Levinson, though, the reason that was such a pivotal scene is because he's pointing to the same thing that I'm pointing to, which is that Thanksgiving became a way for American Jews to sort of prove to themselves and to fellow Americans of their Americanness, and so it became a thing that was patriotic. Like the holiday became a way of showing patriotism while doing things that felt, you know,
very
they felt
Jewish.
Jewish. They do read Jewish,
Cook a
right?
lot of
You get
food,
together,
you
you
cook a lot of
eat.
comfort food. Like Thanksgiving food is pretty similar to Eastern European
Right.
food. Like it's heavy and like root and bread and carb based, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You know, I know my mother, like, yeah, my mom, like the whole Jewish side of both sides of my family appreciate it. I think the difference is that like I could be mistaken, but I feel like you're right. Like there is something that is special about the holiday and collective memory of various folks. I mean, even in my extended family, like even my Black and Native American family, like everyone, you know, even with the complications aside, I think that there's a real anchor around connection and giving and sharing and love and
Gratitude.
and abundance, like the
Mm-hmm.
abundance of love and sharing.
Cornucopia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like these and I have a hot take about some of the dynamics.
Oh,
I have an insight, which is that
let me hear
like,
it.
yeah, that in terms of some of the strife that comes up, seemingly inevitably between different members of the family, I just had an insight. There are different things you can do with it. That part of the reason why, and this ties in some of my own learning that I'm doing right now for myself, as I work to deepen my own mindfulness and um, living into the values I truly hold up. Part of what makes Thanksgiving so explosive at times, not for everyone, but for certain folks, is because we're having to confront what we avoid all year. Right. And so this isn't an insight that will necessarily help in the moment. But for me, it's sort of like an aha around if there's a way, just noticing that. Like, I think there are different ways of taking that, but like that. And I know, from personal experience and from narratives and perspectives of friends, that at times with family, I think at times, particularly because of interlocking trauma or pain, I think that's what especially makes it hard, is that it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's not light. Like all the stuff, things that we would let somebody else, like part of it. So that there's part of what's happening externally, but it's also our stuff, and that people know where our buttons are, and that people say things
Yes.
that, like, somebody could say something in that context that if somebody said even to us in a different context, it wouldn't push that button, because it's that person and that
Right.
history that's unresolved. It sets off these things. So I want to give a shout out and much love and acceptance to a number of the folks who may or may not be missing family and are actually celebrating this year, that because of the pandemic, they don't have to experience certain painful dynamics. And there's all kinds of things that are going on here. Some of it's really straightforward and just needs some good old conflict resolution. Some of this is about intergenerational trauma and abuse, and is really complicated, so, but
Right.
it is, to me, worth noticing that, in some ways, that I just want to note, and I don't have or maybe I do, but I feel like there's a humility factor that's like, but is just awareness around the fact that there's certain things that we numb or ignore, and that at times any like key family gatherings give us an opportunity to notice these things. And I think what's hard, I think there's like a couple dynamics at play where it's like, how do we get through this? Is, how do we navigate this as best as possible? And then there's another part around, because some of these things we just want to let go of and never deal with again. And some of these things we may want to let go of, but ultimately, if that person were to die or pass, like were to die, we'd regret that we didn't resolve that. We might realize that could have been resolved, right? And so each person needs to delineate where very clear boundaries need to be set, and where it's workable. I think with regard to race and racism, my hope would be that it's workable. And with folks for whom, and there are many, like, that is impossible. My uncle so-and-so, my aunt, my father, is just my grandpa, my brother, my sister. I think that I want to invite people to consider that that's a sacred task. That old friend family friend who visits, who's a great, whatever their profession is, and has these most asinine views. I think it's helpful to find a middle ground where we don't need to solve it today. That's largely them. But is there a way over time where we can do the work with that loved one, or that person who's proximate to people we love, or that person who we don't love, but who we are in relationship with for various reasons? And what I'd invite some folks to consider, if you haven't already, that I think there are a lot of articles out there from psychologists and therapists and various thought leaders that can talk about navigating some of these dynamics in the moment. And I think I would just make a plug for some of this stuff is also long term, and it's an opportunity to show, it's an opportunity for us to see where are the places where we, like, I loved it. Someone said, I feel like it was like I forget who it was. Oh, it was like I don't know if it was Rumi. It was someone really profound, or maybe it was a misquoting that I saw on social media, because it was said in like modern language, but it was like, someone is a master until they go home to their family. And I remembered when I experienced that a few years ago, where I really felt on top of the world, and I was mindful, and I did all of this healing work. And as soon as I entered the orbit of my family, it was like I went from 0 to 60 internally. And it was just like, whoa, what is that? And it just brings up healings that need to happen. And I just think healing is so important and it's so tricky. And I'm mostly talking to myself here. And I've been, thinking and reflecting on this a lot and doing my own personal work around this, that patient persistence is important. That just because we don't have the solution yet doesn't mean that we can't keep searching for the right teacher, for the right approach to continue tilling our own soil, as well as practicing loving compassion for those in our lives, because we're all we've got. I think that's a part of it. Like we both live in an abundant world. And as we're seeing through this election cycle, which was another thing we forgot to name. And so for those folks who either are getting together virtually or in person, because depending upon where you are in the country and the world, that's feasible, that there also was this really painful thing that just happened where
Still happening. It's still
there's one
happening.
side that lost and one side that won. And the side that won, a lot of folks are both happy about the victory, and it's also a very complicated victory that surfaced a lot of areas we need to work. I'm curious to hear, I've been talking a lot. I'm wondering if you have anything else to say. Tracie, you usually have key insights.
Thanks. I think that what's coming up for me as you're talking is kind of where you landed, which is that it's a lot about the internal work for oneself. I think I think about members of my own family where patient persistence, yes, and there are some people who just aren't ready and may never be ready for whatever the healing is that needs to happen. And I think each person has to kind of navigate that to decide what they're willing to do. I've heard you, April, say before that like regarding trainings, there are some groups for whom you get to sort of see where they are and you're like, you know what, I'm not the right trainer for this group because I can't go there. I don't want to do that to myself. And so I'm going to connect them with someone else. And which I think is an important model
of boundary setting
for all of this. Yeah. About boundary setting, because I think you're right that sometimes we do write people off too soon because we are, we're
triggered.
Caught in the urgency cycle, in the urgency, lie that if things can't get done like that, they can't get done. And so we need to push back against that, that false urgency. But I think there are cases where no amount of patient persistence, I can think of at least one person in my, family tree where no amount of patient persistence will work until that person does some work. No amount of patient persistence from me. So,
and it's also worth noting, I want to be really clear here for some folks, whether it's in your direct intimate partner or in your extended family, and there are also members of the family for whom it's not safe. And I think, like, to me, there's a really key distinction, because for some, whether they are psychosis or whatever state of mind they're in, or their behavior is just extremely abusive, and there's a distinction between. I think I'm specifically naming that I've seen a lot of posts on social media over the last couple years where I see people giving up on their friends and family because they have a difference of opinion.
Yes.
And that is not enough reason. That being said, it is important to be clear about where your line is. And I think what I'm saying is, without it going into a realm where really ideally it's at a point where professionals need to get involved. And I think at times people say that when it's nowhere near there, when, but for those who are mindful and for whom this is hopefully helpful and supportive in some way. So I just want to be clear, like, there's all kinds of things that show up in family. And I'm fortunate that in my own life, that those who are most abusive we are no longer in communication. So that's not something I need to face. I'm more talking. So, like, I don't want anything we've said in this episode to confuse folks around us, pushing you back toward people who are both psychologically, mentally,
Financially.
physically, spiritually abusive.
Right.
And like, but the last thing I'll say is that there's still a little bit of ground there for me. Like there's someone in my life who I really love a lot, and there's abusive dynamic at play. And so I've been in a real holding pattern with this person because I can't, I feel like I can't, and I don't think that's fully true, but I haven't yet figured out how to be with that person without it reminding me of old abusive dynamics. And this person is really important to me. And I do believe on some level, I got to figure it out. So that kind of brings us full circle where it's not at a point, it's not far, it's not, what's the word? It's not a lost cause. I feel like there needs to be intermediaries involved in the process to help us reach resolution. And I still reach for that. Even though I'm keeping distance with that person, I'm still hopeful because they matter and I love them. And so I feel like we've given sort of a spectrum of,
Yes.
and there's like a certain point, and at times it's different for different people depending
Yep.
upon, like I'm aware with this specific person I'm talking about, there are other people for whom interacting with this person would be fine because they don't have old patterns around that. And so might be like, oh, this isn't so savory, but I'm just going to let it roll off my back. Whereas as it has this effect on me. And so I both try to continue to do work around my own healing and also seek out support to help me figure it out. So I think I want to offer love to all of us, and specifically those of us who have people who we do want to be in a relationship, and it's not easy. And I really invite you to be present with yourself this holiday, whether you're with people or you're by yourself, and recognize your inherent divinity, your inherent value. That if you find the practice of gratitude meaningful on this day, that you extend it to yourself.
That's really hard. It can be really hard for some of us to do that. And I think I just want to highlight that, like, yes, I reiterate the invitation, gratitude for oneself, even though it can be hard.
Yeah. And that all of this takes time, so to be as present as we can and also do things that bring us comfort if and when discomfort is arising or things are happening that bring us into our panic zone, that we can find ways. One of my strategies that I use at times when I'm with family is politely stepping away to go to the restroom and do 10 mindful breaths, like really just inhaling, holding it, noticing the suffering that I'm feeling, and exhaling and taking my time and being like, yep, this is about the time that it'll take it to go to the bathroom. Nobody's going to notice. And if I really do it and if I check in with myself, it's almost like I often don't cry, but it's almost like I'm releasing something. Like, and if I do it all the way to 10, which is like a few minutes to do it slowly, it gives me a reset and I'm able to re-enter the space. So whether it's that or going off video or doing different things that give us a little bit of a buffer, I think a lot of these things, like these dynamics, took years often to cement or to develop, and they're likely going to take years to untangle. And so it's like, how can we care for ourselves and savor what is good? Like, because of my orientation with the holiday, I think because it's important to some of my family members, I both plan to reach out to them. And Asan, my partner, was so sweet. He was like, well, we'll like do the holiday. And I was like, actually, no, for me, I'd rather not. But at the risk of sounding cheesy, I want to really sincerely say that please know that you're loved and that this journey is ongoing. I strive in this work to not punt everything into the future and also recognize that I'm not going to solve everything right now. And so to just center in what I love and appreciate in that moment, even if it's just the wallpaper and the cranberry sauce, and know that I'm, God willing, going to live for another day with more insight and more opportunities. Anything else to add, Tracie? Do you want to say the holiday greeting to folks before we go?
Gosh, it's a hard one. I mean, I guess I just wish everyone as much peace and love and gratitude as you can have on this American Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah. And I also wish you moments of mindfulness that can have the elements that Tracie talked about, and also just loving awareness about what we're noticing show up as we're alone or with family or anywhere in between. Thanks for tuning in. Our show's theme music was composed by Elliot Hammer. You can find this track and other beats on Instagram at Elliot Hammer. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. To join the conversation, visit JewsTalkRacialJustice.com, where you can send us a question or suggestion, access our show notes, and learn more about our team. Take care until next time, and stay humble and keep going.